welcome. Thank you for joining us. You seem fairly relaxed at the moment. We'll see where this takes us. But I just do want to reflect, I guess, particularly in the last, say 6 months. There's been a lot that's happened. You've had the launch, bedding down of the national, of the Australia territory. And then you find out you've got a new appointment, that period of limbo, new appointment, but where is it? To find out that you are returning home. Have you really had a chance to really sit as you are now and just reflect on it? Have you had that opportunity over the last handful of months?
Yeah, we had, after the announcement came out that we were moving, but before the announcement came to where we were going, we had a chance to just take some time out and go away for 2 weeks, and it just gave us a chance to just relax and just debrief and chat with each other and come to the realization how exhausted we are.
Okay, yeah.
And just thinking, yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride. And we come to that awareness once we just sat and relaxed. And, but thankful for that opportunity of just having that time away and reflecting on what's taken place, especially these last 6 months to a year.
So do you feel like you are reconciled with everything that's gone on? It's a time to finish well?
I think there really is for us a sense that the 6-year journey has been an amazing journey, probably more than we would ever ask or imagine. Has been the experience of the 6 years. In the last 6 months, pretty dynamic in so many ways. I think there has been for us a growing sense, and it's not just been by virtue of our visa coming to its completion, but a sense that the timing is right for change to happen. Timing is right for change to happen for Australia, and timing right for us to change. So having, as Tracey indicated, that pause moment where we were away for a couple of weeks really allowed us to come to terms with what that might mean and what that looks like going forward.
Okay, 6 years. You mentioned 6 years. So let's go back 6 years, and you've been appointed as territorial leaders. So what was then the Australia Southern Territory? 6 years on, though, everything that's happened, how are Floyd and Tracey Tidd? How are you, I guess, better equipped as Salvationists, as people, to what you were back then? I mean, how is this time in Australia? How is it? And look at all these incredible challenges. How's it shaped you, changed you?
I think when we look back over these last 6 years, we never imagined staying in this appointment for 6 years, although we've immensely enjoyed our time here and we don't really want to leave because we love Australia. But as we reflect and look back, I say I am not the same person I was 3 years ago, let alone 6 years ago. So I feel that I have grown in my faith. I feel like I've become aware, as we've traveled around the nation, become aware and have a broader perspective on what the Salvation Army is in communities and with regards to context and what that looks like in the Salvation Army in Australia. I think it's strengthened my faith in the fact that God has done amazingly more than we could ever ask or imagine. And I'm just... I just marvel at that. Not that I doubted that, but I just seen in this space and time that we've been through, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that God has just done amazingly more than I myself could ever ask or imagine. And I truly believe that I'm different because I have this bolder faith to trust God in the things that I can't see or couldn't see right in front of me. And I trust Him fully as I move forward and just trust Him one day at a time and not worry about what the future looks like ahead.
What about you, Floyd?
I think it's a great question, Scott. I think there's probably a number of people on the Canada and Bermuda side of things who are wondering what's coming back to us
Yes.
that left 6 years ago. And I think we are, as Tracey's indicated, we've been significantly shaped by the experiences here. You talk about challenges. There's certainly been some challenges in the journey of 6 years of leadership. There's also been some ecstatic moments of great enthusiasm, excitement when we've seen things happening here. So I think how we've been changed, I think our hearts have been lifted and broadened in our own faith and expectation. Our hearts have been broken as well through some of the journey of what this has meant, not for us, but for people. And I think we have been most affected and shaped by the people of Australia.
You've mentioned some of those really uplifting times, ecstatic, but there have been challenges. One of those, you really hadn't been here that long. And we've got the Royal Commission, and it must have been a pretty trying time for you. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. Without a question, Scott, that the journey together with the people, the Salvationists, the officers, employees, soldiers of Australia through the Royal Commission is a part of a journey that we never anticipated coming. There was no early indication to us that would be a part of the journey, but we weren't long on the ground in Australia where we became aware of the reality of that and the necessity of that journey. I think for us, through that journey, we became all the more aware of the power of the individual influence upon a person's life. We've seen in the journey of Australia, our 6 years here, the light that one can bring. We've also seen the darkness that one can bring. And so the opportunity to represent the Salvation Army through the Royal Commission was a challenging but honorable opportunity. I think when the word came that when we were then leading the Southern Territory for the Salvation Army, that we would present for case study number 33, and that I would be called to represent the Salvation Army, there was a dawning awareness for me that it wasn't just to represent the Salvation Army. It was also the opportunity for myself as the leader of the Salvation Army in the Southern Territory at that time, and also the opportunity for us as the Salvation Army as a movement to represent Christ. In many cases, by virtue of what had happened to so many, there was a false representation of the Christian message. Our journey through the Royal Commission, I think, has given us as a movement and us as leaders an opportunity to represent Christ.
Yeah, so you mentioned Floyd, you were the person that had to represent the Salvation Army. But one thing that I've picked up through your time here is you very much are a team. And maybe this question I could direct it to you, Tracey. At that time, the support structure you had around yourselves, because as we said, you really hadn't been here long. So to really sort of, I guess, develop that sort of a structure, was it a time when you really had to work together?
I think so, because for personal reasons, I did not sit in the courtroom. So I was back in Melbourne and went to Adelaide on weekends to support Floyd. But we chatted every day, and my support to him was I was just making sure he was okay at the end of the day after he came off the stand from speaking. I think Neil Venables has been a great support to Floyd, so I had that confidence in him that he was looking out for him. And also the people around us, the Chief Secretary, TSWM at the time, and our cabinet secretaries at the time. We had a support system there. And we also had counseling, debriefings on a regular basis, Floyd, so much so every night. And then at the end of the journey, we had a session or two, I can't remember it now, but where we had the opportunity to meet with pastoral care and just debrief. And then we took time out to ourselves just to recover from that experience that we had.
But even hearing you speak about it now, that sounds like it was a very intense time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it was intense because of the necessity of doing that journey, the necessity of sitting with survivors, the necessity of owning a past that none of us want to own, but is a reality that needed to be owned. And through that to ensure that we were doing all that we could in the present to help any and every survivor that would present themselves. We're grateful, as you indicate, we'd only been here a number of months when this began. We were here probably almost a whole year before the actual appearance for the Southern Territory took place. The real strength of partnership that we felt between the territories through the Royal Commission, there was a real partnership in working that together, creating a united front. We'd handled matters differently, but we were one Salvation Army, and to do that journey together as so many Salvos across the nation supporting us in prayer.
And we've just looked at what was a particularly intense time, but I imagine that the roles, the position that you have, your territorial leaders, that intensity doesn't really let up all that often. What can it be like for you? It must be hard to be involved in a corps the way you probably would like to be involved in small groups. You've got to be making these decisions at times that doesn't always make you popular with everybody. I'm just curious, what is it like for you? And I'd like to get aside from the business side, but what's it like for you personally to have these sorts of roles? How do you cope with it?
I always say that, I say this often, when you're at senior leadership level, it's a very lonely life, and I speak from experience. So we rely on each other, very much so, and so I think in the last 6 years we've Not that our marriage is wrong or nothing's wrong in our marriage, but I think we've become closer because we've had to rely on each other in those difficult moments. And and we have gained some friendships here, and which we will truly miss, and good colleagues that had partnered together with us and shared the journey with us. So we've been through, I think, 3 chiefs and 3 TSWMs and a few cabinet changes along the way over the last 6 years. But I have to say, every change has been great, and we have partnered together. As Floyd's favorite passage of scripture is, we're partners in the gospel, and so we do journey together. So
We say every change, and maybe I'm taking this slightly out of context, but every change has been great. Well, let's look at change. We have the announcement, that the 2 territories in Australia are to become 1. Again, but let's go back before you were appointed leaders of the Australia Territory. Were you prepped on that possibility? This conversation had been going on for some time, but were you prepped? Were you aware that you could?
no.
It's funny. There was no conversation about that prior to our arrival. And I remember we arrived in June of 2013. In November, I was on a hot seat panel for the Southern Territory's Young Adult Youth Leadership Leaders Lounge. And one of the questions that was put before me was, you come from Canada, it's a large land mass, it's a single territory. What do you think about 2 territories in Australia? And I remember so quickly being able to answer and say, that's really not a question for me. That's really a question for 2 territories to wrestle through
that response,
when there are 2 Australian leaders leading the 2 territories. So that's not a piece that we need to worry about while we're here. Well, within about 18 months, studies were underway and things began to evolve, and that conversation extended further, ended up with recommendations to IHQ, and it was to move to 1 territory. Did we anticipate that we would stay? We thought that actually probably precipitated our departure. Conclusion of term, bring in a new leader, but the view of IHQ was that we would stay and we would lead through the 2 territories into a merger.
I mean, can you, again, perhaps share a bit about that time, that process from when being the leaders of the Australia Territory to becoming the leaders of what was, or overseeing the transition? Just how that all came about, how you end up finding yourself in that position that you were going to lead it?
It's not hard to find yourself in that position when you get a phone call from IHQ.
Yes.
It quickly puts you in that position. I think when we reflect back on it, we're really grateful that we did the journey of study of the 2 territories and what's the best way to operate Australia. Really grateful we did that journey together with James and Jan Condon. We loved working together as partner leaders in 2 territories for the time that we'd been together here for 3 years. But really the wisdom they brought to the conversations, the understanding, together with ourselves being able to make the representation to IHQ. Announcement was made on March 1st. We didn't take effect until June 1st. So that allowed for 3 months of continued transition and work together with both cabinets fully intact and with James and Jan still supporting alongside in the journey that we knew would lead to a national leadership approach. Yeah.
So out of this whole process, there's many new initiatives. I think very early on in the process, I've heard you say, Floyd, a possibility or a chance to hit the reset button.
Yeah.
So a lot of these new initiatives, things that are happening in Australia, are other territories around the world, showing interest, perhaps looking to implement themselves. Themselves. One of them, I guess one of the big ones, and I might direct this to you, Tracey, is the gender equity question. What sort of response are you getting from other territories?
Look, when we first brought this proposal to IHQ, it was a big proposal. And part of the proposal was the gender equity part with regards to having somebody placed in that leadership role, as well as putting a committee together and what that looked like. So when we proposed that to IHQ, there was no thought about not doing it. It was just yes, right on. And I think from that moment, we were quite excited of what that would look like. And Colonel Julie Campbell chose to take on that role. She has a passion, and she has done a great job in that role of bringing this committee together and also holding us accountable as a movement in all areas of what that looks like, whether it be in our boards, whether it be in personnel council, appointment council. And also we've just lifted the bar from 30% women and 30% men to 40%, because we have already met that target in most of our settings. We still have a long ways to go, But I think in the conversations at our executive leaders conference around the world when we meet, conversation is taking place and people are asking us, so what have you done? How have you done? And even the context in some of our other countries where gender equity doesn't quite fit because of the culture, just asking the questions, the men are asking the questions, and we are so grateful for that because at least it brings them some kind of awareness at the back of their mind that this can take place, and perhaps not all at once in your culture, but at least you have that thinking in the back of your mind. So we are quite pleased that we are on target, and the world is watching. And we've just come to realize that IHQ now has put a team together with regards to gender equity and what does that look like across the world. And so we are quite pleased for that. And actually Julie Campbell is on that reference group as an ex officio so that she can speak into that space because we are so far ahead of what's happening around the world.
So you are progressing as you
so
would have
we are
hoped?
progressing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier the Canada and Bermuda territory to which you return.
Yes.
There's going to be interest there, or what are we getting? What's returning?
Yes.
But again, this journey with the Australia territory.
Yeah.
Are there things there where you're going to go, yes, this is something that we think we would like to explore in that context of Canada and Bermuda?
I think in any one of our appointments, and probably this one most obviously, during the journey of leadership, we add to our own toolbox. So our toolkit as we leave Australia has massively expanded based on the number of things that we've experienced here, things that have been implemented, things that have been sourced and identified as opportunities and challenges met. So we go back to Canada with, I think, a larger toolkit than we had when we arrived here. What of that will fit? I think we'll need to take time. Really looking forward to a window of time in the Canadian context. We've been away for 6 years. So the necessity to take time to listen to the stories and to listen to the Spirit, and then to understand what God really has in mind already in place for the Canadian territory and how we come along to participate with Canada and Bermuda in exploring what God has in store and what toolkit we bring from here.
Yeah.
I asked more than a few, a good number of Salvationists around the country, if they had a chance to sit and ask you a question, what would it be? I've got a few here. Are you happy if I just go through some of these? Okay. The first one, Floyd, it's directed to yourself, so I'll read the question. Floyd, the unification of the two Australia territories, that was begun in 2016, officially launched 5 months ago. Yet there still seems to be much change happening, positions to be filled, processes that are being tinkered with. So, is this where we should be, or are we behind on the timeline you'd imagined?
Yeah.
Just recently I was in one of the interstate divisions, and a question put to me by somebody as we were walking along the sidewalk said to me, so is Australia One working from your view? And I think to answer that question and the question you just asked, it's yes and not yet. Yes, it is working and it's not yet fully realized. I think the amount of change that we've chosen to undertake is going to take time. There are processes that need to be redeveloped. We could have done a system where we simply said we'll take what exists and we'll mash it together and have a single, simple, straightforward operation, doing what we've always done, but doing it in more streamlined fashion. We chose the harder opportunity, and that was to actually say, what are we doing and what's the best way to actually deliver the Army's mission in Australia in the 21st century? So that's going to take us time. Our board, the governance board, have actually said to us, we're probably on a 2 to 5 year journey of continued changes. My ultimate hope, I think, actually, though, is that we don't actually ever come to a sense of we've landed, that we're always evaluating what does it mean to be the Salvation Army in Australia at this point in time, and that we have the courage to continue to change what needs to change to be the most effective that we can be for a mission that desperately is needed in Australia.
I've got a question that's directed to you, Tracey. And again, we're looking at the gender, it's around the gender equity issue again, but perhaps not the sort of question. Well, I'll ask it. Tracey, if you'd allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment, this is the questioner. In an age when we're looking seriously in this territory at gender equity in the Salvation Army and trying to create a level playing field for Salvationists of both genders, why do we have such a large focus on women's ministries but not a person specifically appointed to men's ministries?
I get that question asked of me all the time. And I think for my role as Territorial President of Women's Ministry, that's a structure that comes from IHQ. So it's an intentional focus on ministering to women that is guided from IHQ. And I think that it's an important role that we play in ministry to women, because if you look at the stats of Australia, half of Australia are made up of women, and half of our core are made up of women. And we have so many women's groups around this nation that are meeting the needs of the women in our community. I think in the new, we would not want to just, water that down. I think in the new structure in the mission department that Ann Jeffries is part of, with women's ministries and families, and then adult and seniors, I think you'll see a more emphasis on men's ministries under the adult section, which is, and also comes under the family section. So I think if we just watch that space, I think we'll see something new come into that space where it's going to be women, family, children, all encompassed under one umbrella. So I think if we watch that space, we'll,
Okay.
yeah.
I've got a couple more questions. Either of you, or both of you can answer. This one is around, again, the Australia Territory, the creation of a new territory, and it's around, I'll read the question again. Most territories in the Salvation Army world have two significant institutions: territorial headquarters, the training college. For purposes of inclusiveness, would it not have been wiser to have one in what is now the old Southern Territory and one in the old Eastern Territory? Questioner goes on to say, I'm aware that the decision to have both in the South has reinforced the thinking of some, or perhaps many, Eastern Territory Salvationists that the creation of a new Australia Territory is little more than a Southern Territory takeover. Who wants to answer that?
We've
Great
heard that.
question.
We've heard that.
Yeah, okay.
I think what we need to clearly understand is that the two questions about the location of a training college and the location of a THQ are really two distinct questions, and were dealt with independent of each other to make the best decision for training and the best decision for THQ, rather than saying, because we made that decision, we have to do this. Actually, both were looked at independently to arrive at the best decision. I think what's also worth noting for both training college and both for THQ is that the Australian territories have made a move, even before we became one united territory, of what we called centrally coordinated, geographically dispersed. So even when there were two training colleges, not all training happened in those two colleges. So the last session we commissioned actually had a cohort of cadets trained from Brisbane, 5 cadets in Brisbane, although the training college was in Sydney for the former Eastern Territory. Similarly, the Southern Territory had a cadet in training in Perth. So I think as we move forward, the recognition that although we have one training college site, which is based in Melbourne, we anticipate the continued training of cadets in multiple paths of training and multiple locations. Similarly with THQ, although the cabinet and territorial leaders are resident in Melbourne, and there is a THQ campus at Blackburn, we've also taken an approach in the new structure that THQ is centrally coordinated and geographically dispersed, so that the Redfern site continues to operate as a THQ campus with a number of staff there, but also in every state we've embedded THQ staff members. So THQ is actually across the nation engaged. The reference to the Australia Southern takeover, we hear two songs or two choruses being sung, somewhat subtly, somewhat whispered or quiet at times, but it depends which choir you may have come from. And so some choristers may well be singing, it's an Australia Southern takeover, while some other choristers are singing, it's an Australia Eastern invasion. And so it just depends which choir you came from in the past, but I think what we're seeing come together is a sense of we're one united choir, and there is one song to be sung, and it's that we are the army, that we are the Salvation Army that Australia needs today.
Yeah.
Okay. Final submitted question. Maybe Tracey, you would like to see how you would answer this. There's been a significant decline in the church in many places in the world, particularly in Western countries. And that does include the Salvation Army. What do you think is the answer to stopping the decline and thriving in the very different world of the late 2010s?
It's interesting because at our last governance board, we had a guest speaker come, and we looked at trends and numbers and decline. And as we looked at those numbers, we're not the numbers don't lie, and the Army is not exempted from those trends and numbers. And I think that we have to just look at what we're doing, because some of the stuff we're doing is not working. We've been doing stuff for 10, 20 years, and it's not worked, and it hasn't made a difference in that space. And I think if we're going to do something different, it requires resourcing, but what are the measurements and what are the outcomes in those spaces? I think we have to do that measurement, and so that we can just realize that, okay, yes, we've tried something, but it's not working. So how do we measure that? And I think our main purpose is people, which will always be people. And so how do we open the doors to those people that we come in contact with? Because no longer do people come into our buildings. We have to get out of our buildings, and we need to go meet the people where they are. And I call that organic ministry. So meet the people where they are in your communities. And I think we have to be really intentional about that. And I think if we look across the nation, and it is taking place, I think core-based social is going to happen more and more, and I think that's really prevalent as we move forward in meeting the needs of our communities.
I think I'll just add to Tracey's point. I think it is ultimately about people.
Yeah.
And so the numbers would indicate people aren't necessarily showing up in our buildings on Sunday mornings, but people are showing up in our buildings and our programs, and it's our ability to connect with them. It's our ability and willingness to as a people, to get back out into our communities. And where we see growth, where we see turnaround happening, is where we're doing that, where we're well engaged in where the community are already at. I think in the inauguration of Australia, the Australia One journey in Adelaide in September 2016, I made a statement there that I still hold true to. I'm not as concerned about how many from our communities attend our core as I am as to how well our core attend to our communities. I think that's always been the mantra of the Salvation Army, being out into our communities.
Well, that's the 4 submitted questions handled. Fine job. So, these are back to questions I'd like to ask of you. Floyd, you're known for your positivity and your optimism. And I'm just checking Tracey here to see her response to that statement. But you are, both when it comes to, to how the Army is progressing in Australia and just, generally in your character. But I am wondering, is there anything you regret about the last 6 years? Anything with the benefit of hindsight you'd say, look, I'd do that differently now?
Yeah. I don't think there's a whole lot that I would do different. I think a good part of that is I've carefully checked, in on a regular basis with where are we, what are we doing, what have I done, how have I approached that? So we've been modifying as we go. But if there was one thing, I think a greater emphasis on continuing to tell more of the stories that we have the privilege of seeing when we traverse back and forth across the territory. So in the midst of so much change that was happening and the intensity of that being felt in certain corners, for the stories of the impact that's being made in the front line, lives being transformed, sitting, whether it's with a survivor or whether it's with somebody who's been through one of our programs or somebody who's, as a family, have just come into the Army as a place of faith community and discovering what it means to be a follower of Jesus. I think if anything, it'd be finding more ways to tell more of those stories.
Yeah. That's it. You really feel you're quite comfortable with the last 6 years, and most of those, I guess we're really focusing on the bigger decisions that had to be made.
Yeah, I think so, because I think we didn't make decisions independently, and so we really worked well with a team. So grateful what's been accomplished in Australia has been really the result of solid team. Joint cabinets in the earliest days of the Australia One journey, 2 cabinet groups coming together regularly for that, and then the establishment of the steering committee, and the establishment of the new national cabinet, worked closely with those. So I don't think there's any of the decisions that we've made that I would kind of go back and say, we did that one wrong. I think we've made the decisions that we need to make with the information that we as a group had at the time, and that we've continued to move forward from those decisions.
How would you respond to some comments that the Salvation Army is becoming, more corporatised?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah. I think there's a recognition, especially in the journey of Australia One, that we are talking about a corporate entity. We're talking about an operation that deals with 10,000 employees, 30,000 volunteers, 1,000 officers, and has in excess of $1 billion operations annually. We owe it. We owe it to the people who support us and to the people we serve to have the best business practices in place and the best governance in place. That doesn't have to be in opposition to being a strong spiritual, evangelical, and holiness movement. I think the two actually ride well together.
I think it's our responsibility
Okay.
as officers or soldiers to live out our calling and also to be evangelists. God calls us to share the good news of Jesus Christ, so it's up to us as officers and soldiers to do that. And not all of us are evangelists, but we have that opportunity to just be salt and light in the world in which we live, and to just be a holy people who live out God's mission in that which He has called us to do. So we have that responsibility ourselves.
Just a couple more questions, and on both, and I'd like to hear from both of you. Tracey, what is it that excites you about the Salvation Army in Australia now?
Oh, look, when I
Long
look,
answer, is it?
well, I don't know. There's so much. I think as we've traveled to every state, and we continue to do that before we move in a couple of months, but and just sitting with people and having conversations with people, you know, it's not all gloomy. I think there's a lot of things happening in the Salvation Army across the nation, and I truly believe that we have a strong force in our officers who are very positive and excited to be doing what God has called them to do. And it doesn't matter how hard it is. You see them out there slugging it out, and it's all about the people to whom they serve. You know, whether it's the AOD that we have meals with and have conversations with them, or whether it's just the people in the Corps, the people in the community. And I just think that the Salvation Army is so much advanced here in Australia as I look around other territories. And I just think that God is going to continue to do amazing things in and through the Salvation Army. And like Floyd says, it's up to us to continue to share those stories of transformation. You know, it goes back to our vision statement. Wherever there's hardship and injustice, Salvos will live, love, and fight alongside others to transform Australia one life at a time with the love of Jesus. That's what our officers are doing, and it's just amazing to watch. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm assuming you would agree. Are there
I would
other
agree
things
entirely.
that you see? Other things that you see that excite you about it?
I think what really excites me is actually what's happening in Australia in a much more formalized way, perhaps now than even before the Australia One journey, and that's this reintegration. This local mission delivery is not social and or spiritual. I think when we brought together 30 and unders during part of the Australia One visioning journey, one of the comments that came from them is, we dream of the day when we don't talk about social versus spiritual, that we simply are the Salvation Army. And we're seeing that on so many fronts, where it's really hard to draw the line as what is core and what is social, but we're simply the Salvation Army. I think what's exciting for me is that Australia, and it's the Aussie spirit, has had the courage to embrace the opportunity that God placed before them, and has been possible because there have been two strong territories that countless generations of officers, soldiers, employees, volunteers have built a strength in this movement that is recognized by the public Australians, and a strength in two territories by that sacrificial service that brought two territories to a point where they could actually step forward into this new future. I think it's an exciting future for the Salvation Army, and as we journey to the other side of the world, we will be keeping a close eye on what God is doing in and through Salvos officers, soldiers, employees, volunteers.
You know, we get into cabs and have conversation with the cab drivers, and obviously we have our brandware on. We have great conversations of what the Army is in the Salvation Army, and everybody's aware of who the Salvos are. So it's just great to hear and listen to those stories and the people that we come in contact with that aren't Army, and what they see and what we do.
A final question for both of you, and let's think outside of the Salvation Army just for a minute. What is it that you'll miss most about Australia, Tracey?
Oh. Outside of the Salvation Army, the beauty of Australia, the vast cultures in every state, and we've been able to have that advantage of staying a couple of days in each state and just admiring the beauty of God's creation. I think we'll miss the people of Australia. This has become our family for 6 years, and so you build these relationships, and they're strong relationships, and so you can't just turn that off when you move halfway across the world again. But and just miss, you know, the people in Australia are very much like Canadians, And so I think that's why it's been such a good fit for us. And yeah, just miss the people who we're going to be working with. And you know, there's a lot of people in Canada now that I don't remember names anymore because I've learned so many names in Australia, so I have to go back and say, excuse me, can you just remind me of your name again? But yeah, there's a lot that we're going to miss. Yeah.
What about you, Floyd?
I think we're not going to miss the Vegemite challenge.
No.
I was about to say, because I thought that question was more cue to put a couple of big jars of Vegemite.
Yeah,
No, we'll pass on that. We'll pass. We've not met the Vegemite challenge yet, and I don't suspect that we'll conquer that before we leave. I think what Tracy's alluded to, the beauty of this great Southland of the Holy Spirit, you know, in its people and its landscape, we've been touched deeply by the journey of people's lives that they've so openly shared with us. From our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who've allowed us to understand their journey in such an intimate way and to partner with them, from survivors of abuse who still look to the Salvation Army with mixed feelings, but want to sit and have a coffee and have a conversation, to cadets, you know, excited to see over the course of the 6 years that we've been here, you know, 35, 36 auxiliary lieutenants now serving, in addition to an emerging generation of Salvation Army officers who are saying, God's got a plan for Australia. God's got a plan to use the Salvation Army Australia, and we want to be a part of it. So I think there's a fair bit of that that's going to hold a long spot in our hearts, in addition to the weather. In addition to the weather.
Yes.
When we received the first phone call from General Linda Bond, it was a snowy December 27th morning telling us that we would journey to the other side of the world. It's not a bad offer. Not that it was an offer. It was not a bad suggestion.
An instruction.
That we would move to a place. So come next December 27th on a snowy, cold morning, I'm certain that the warm memories of Australia will come back to us.
Thank you both very much. We enjoyed that. I hope
you,
you have.
Scott.
God bless
Thank
you
you.
both.
Thank you very much. We're grateful as well, we'd say, Scott, to you and to the others team and to media who've really shared our journey, helped us with the journey, helped us tell the story in so many ways. Outstanding in your service. Thank you very much.
Thank you.